Good morning, friends and enemies. Now that the NFL draft is already in the books and we're into the early part of May here, obviously we're going to be having our rookie drafts in the leagues we're already in. But for the true sickos, the Dynasty DGens that are really wanting to get into more leagues, now this is the time where Dynasty startup season kicks into even higher gear. And because of that, there's already so many Dynasty startups happening since the NFL draft. I want to go ahead and take a look at this information with you. Startup ADP based on 12-team leagues, which are super flex in lineup with some degree of tight end premium and just a regular PPR format. Let's go ahead and get into these. And what I'm going to do is give you what I think are 5 of the best values right now in Dynasty startups based on this information. So let's go ahead and get right into it. All right, and for today's video, as far as talking these values in startups, I'm basically not going to be talking about the first 4 rounds. Obviously, there's some really great players in there, and I'm not saying there aren't some values in those rounds, but they're already going to be costing you an arm and a leg when you're talking about taking a top 48 pick. So starting at round 5 and beyond is really where I'm going to be focusing on for today's video. And the first person I want to talk about here is Dak Prescott. Now, Dak Prescott obviously is a big winner, I think, recently with the George Pickens trade. The Dallas Cowboys went ahead and traded a 3rd and then also a 5th and 6th swap with the Pittsburgh Steelers to acquire George Pickens. And we talk about Dak Prescott. The reason I think he's such a value currently right now in startups, he's coming off the board at the 605. That's quarterback 22. Now, it'll be interesting to see over the next week or so if there's actually, a little bit of a shift in his dynasty value kind of going up along with the George Pickens trade. Now, for me personally, I was already going to have Dak probably as a value before the George Pickens trade, but certainly after the case, I think him going quarterback 22 doesn't really make sense. And really what I want to do and why I want to talk about him to start it off is I think there's just some things as far as players that are going earlier. When we really compare the bigger picture, there's a combination of recency bias and stuff that doesn't make sense. Listen, and obviously, I think I can make the case for why Dak is in the 6th round pretty easily. I mean, this is a guy that's going to be turning 32 in the offseason, right? Here in July, he'll be 32 years old. He's coming off of a season which was really disappointing and absolutely didn't help any of our fantasy teams. Plus, he got hurt at the end of the year and then wasn't even around in the fantasy playoffs, really even further souring dynasty managers that did have Dak Prescott on their teams. So we take a look at last year. He was quarterback 23 on a points per game basis up until the injury, and then he was 15.6 points per game. Now 15.6 per game really is not going to be doing anything for you, even in Superflex, other than just kind of being a placeholder, someone that's not truly like hurting you, but he's definitely not helping you at the quarterback position. Basically extremely expendable type of production. And when I take a look at the quarterback field, right, so when we get into the 4th round here, right, realistically, when I'm looking at these players, Kyler Murray I think is definitely becoming a little more of a value because he's a Konami code quarterback by the letter of the law. He's probably not the same level of rusher, obviously, of a guy like Hurts, Lamar, Jaden Daniels, and Josh Allen. We have seen one season where he was really elite as far as the rushing goes, but he has not been the truly high-end Konami-style quarterback. But I think at this point, he's becoming more of a value. Once we get past Kyler Murray, though, right? Baker Mayfield, quarterback 14. Cam Ward, quarterback 15. Then we get to Brock Purdy, it's Trevor Lawrence, J.J. McCarthy, Jared Goff, Michael Penix. Realistically, at this point, I think I can make the case for Dak Prescott ahead of pretty much every single one of those players, obviously depending on your team build potentially. If you're in a rebuild, going ahead and taking Dak Prescott ahead of some of those younger quarterbacks definitely is not going to make sense. But as far as production goes, when we take a look, not using just recency bias of last year, we look at 2023 for Dak Prescott. He had a much better season. In 2023, he's coming off of a 20.7 points per game as far as fantasy goes, the quarterback 3 that season. We look at 2022, he did get hurt there again. He was playing in 12 out of 16 games, but on a per game basis, 17.8 fantasy points per game. That was good for quarterback 15 in 2022. Going back the season prior, 2021, quarterback 7, 20.7 fantasy points per game, right? So regardless of what the finish was as far as the season relative to the other quarterbacks, so quarterback 3, 15, or quarterback 7, those 3 years on a points per game basis, he's anywhere from 17.8 all the way up to 20.7, which he happened to do twice. And the reason I think it's such a value, like using 2 players in particular to kind of make my case. Let's use Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield, and the reasons why you'll see here pretty shortly. But take a look at Baker Mayfield coming off at the 406, quarterback 14. He is coming off a very impressive season, right? 22.5 fantasy points per game, which that is a little higher than the 20.7 when we take a look at Dak Prescott in recent memory. Now, Dak, if you go back prior to that, was higher than 22.5, but just for the sake of argument here, using more recent data and stats, 20.7 is definitely a difference between 22.5. However, Baker's coming off of this quarterback 3 season, just like Dak was literally this time last year. So what are we looking at the year prior? In Tampa Bay, he was quarterback 10 the year prior, which is, a very nice finish. But on a points per game basis, and the reason I want to, frame with points per game and thinking about it from that standpoint, 16.7 was his finish in points per game, which is actually good for quarterback 19. Was behind Dak Prescott just literally the last season in 2023. Now, just taking a look prior to that wouldn't really do us much justice because that's the Carolina and LA season. And then prior to that in Cleveland with Stefanski, really using a lot of that data isn't going to be something that's, really worth looking at for the more recent time with him. All right, so going ahead and using Jared Goff, who's coming off in 507, a full round ahead of Dak Prescott almost, quarterback 19. He was last year quarterback 7 on both a points per game basis and his finish. He was 19.7 points per game, right? Using the year prior, he was, again, quarterback 7 that year, but he was 17.8 fantasy points per game, which was good for quarterback 15. And then the year prior in Detroit, so we're going to the 2022 season here, he was quarterback 10, 17.1 fantasy points per game, and that was good for quarterback 16. And the reason I wanted to go through that, right, we're looking at, like with Dak Prescott, the reasons to push him down the board here into round 6 are kind of obvious. You would say age, coming off of a poor season. I get all that. But with Pickens coming over especially, him getting another weapon and someone to help kind of alleviate all the pressure just being strictly on CeeDee Lamb as far as really being a producer as far as volume goes and yardage. Now, with that being the case with Pickens, him being in the 6th round here, it doesn't make sense when we're looking at the total body of work. But we're taking a look at the level of investment, right? I'm going to use the running back position for example here in rounds 4 versus round 6. Right, in rounds 4, you could get guys like Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, or if you wanted to go the young route, Travion Henderson going in round 4. All right. When we get to round 6, the running backs in this range, Derrick Henry, while definitely could be another, great season for him in Baltimore, shelf life is super limited, and certainly we could be looking at him cliffing at any point. Kenneth Walker, the offense and the whole situation in Seattle, much different than in the past. And then Caleb Johnson, who I like him, and I think Pittsburgh is probably going to use him quite a bit. They've talked about it already, but right, we're talking about a totally different level of running back prospect and one that we could consider as far as producing in round 6 versus round 4. That's the difference in potentially, right, as far as pairing goes. I would much rather have a guy like Breece Hall and Jonathan Taylor and Dak Prescott relative to a guy like Baker Mayfield and let's say Kenneth Walker III or Caleb Johnson, or even potentially RJ Harvey if that was your cup of tea. And then looking at just a full round of Dak Prescott versus Jared Goff, this one in particular doesn't make sense to me at all because at least with Baker, you might be able to argue them drafting Emeka Egbuka and the fact that Evans and Godwin are back and Jalen McMillan look good. Maybe you could say, okay, there is a slightly higher ceiling with Baker because of the way he played last year. I could maybe make that case. Jared Goff, to me, when we're looking at Dak Prescott, realistically, it's like mirror images of each other for most of the last several years as far as points per game and production. Not to mention, listen, I'm not saying Jared Goff's going to have a bad season, but Ben Johnson out of town and going to Chicago, I think definitely for me, I would actually be betting on if Dak Prescott's healthy the full season and Jared Goff is healthy the full season. I would actually personally bet on Dak Prescott to Jared Goff. Now, if that's not the case for you, that's fine, but there just is not warranting a full round of difference between these two players. And now at the 10:05, number 2 on this list is going to be DeAndre Swift, currently the running back 29, right? Running back 29, almost outside of the top 32 running backs in startups in the 10th round. And the crazy thing is these are all basically since the NFL draft where we know the Bears didn't address the running back position until way late in the draft, round 7, Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. If you're telling me this was, all summer's ADP, fine. I could completely understand it because there was nothing but all the mocks projecting a running back going to Chicago. After the drafts, this doesn't make any sense. Thinking about how bad that offensive line was last year, using the run block rating for DeAndre Swift, last season for the Chicago Bears, he was 39th in the NFL as far as the run block rating he received. Not very good at all. We take a look at the year prior, actually what was a career breakout, so to speak, and his highest rushing yards we've ever seen for his career at that point. That was over in Philadelphia with a very good offensive line, and that he was 5th in the NFL that year as far as rushing yards go, and that was as far as run block rating for DeAndre Swift. He was 4th in the NFL. Very good run block for him in that 2023 season. Then taking a look at 2022, when you look at the 2022 season, that's where people basically got really skeptical about Ben Johnson and DeAndre Swift. he was dealing with a lot of injuries throughout that year, and basically his usage was pretty sparing. But that was the only other time in DeAndre Swift's career where he had a good run block rating. That was 12th, but he was being given a lot of the touches and overall snap share. He was ceding that to Jamal Williams that year. 2021, we have 64th was the run block rating that he had with Detroit in that year, where he got a ton of work. And actually using that 2021 season where he was 64th as far as his run block rating, he was 8th in the NFL as far as snap share goes, well over 60%, which was very comparable to what he got last year in Chicago, where he was 10th as far as snap share goes. But again, 64th in the NFL run block rating for 2021, and his rookie season 2020, 59th was his run block rating. Basically, for all of his career, when he's had poor blocking, this is part of the reason I think we see his yards per carry and just overall rushing stats leave a little bit to be desired, and his overall rushing ceiling touchdown hasn't been that high because, one, a lot of these teams weren't actually that good, but then two, he's only been anywhere from 6 to 8 goal line touches in his career. So one of the big things I think that we're missing, though, when we're looking at Ben Johnson in that year in 2022, let's use where that was his first season as the OC. While his snap share was definitely down and Jamal Williams did have a great rushing season, one of the things we look at is 2022, 70 targets. 2021, 78 targets. And in his rookie season in 2020, he had 57 targets. Using that Philadelphia year, which I think is much more realistic to compare versus what the offensive line is projecting in this season. I'm not saying they're going to be a top 5 offensive line, but I think they're certainly one of the top units in the NFL, probably something like 12th or better. This overall offensive line shift is huge, massive for this team. So thinking about this being a very good run blocking offense, I think at this point, that's going to have a chance to have a lot of scoring opportunities with Ben Johnson. DeAndre Swift getting even at that same 60-something% range where he was in 2021 and 2024, given totally the lack of running backs on this offense, reasonable. Even when he was playing under 50% of the snaps, though, with Ben Johnson, 70 targets, that's hugely different than I think what most people think of for DeAndre Swift of late, where in Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts is not someone that likes to check the ball down. A guy like Saquon Barkley, who's had 90-plus targets in all of his seasons back in the days of the Giants, he only had 42. We take a look at what DeAndre Swift had. He had 49 targets in that season with Philadelphia, and last year he only had 54 targets. And I think the overall biggest thing when we take a look last year, Shane Waldron was a disaster. And not just that, Caleb Williams, I think, while you could argue he would want to check down in these scenarios, he was trying to extend plays and try to make some kind of miracle play happen. While Caleb Williams was getting all kinds of pressure because the interior of this line was not very good, he was kind of running around and scrambling for his life, trying to make bigger plays and didn't check the ball down as much. I think Ben Johnson in an offense like this is going to draw up a lot more opportunities for DeAndre Swift to catch the ball out of the backfield. I think DeAndre Swift outside of the top, realistically like 24 running backs, is honestly getting kind of criminal, considering we have seen actually for him a lot of fantasy success in the last couple of years. Personally, with what I know about both David Montgomery and Alvin Kamara at this point, they're both getting older, and I think at that point that's fine, but they certainly shouldn't be anyone that you're betting on for more than a season. And given that being the case with what I'm expecting both for all these offenses, I'd actually take DeAndre Swift ahead of them. But certainly you can make the case if you wanted to contend and just go for right now's production and you prefer Kamara or Montgomery, fine. But in the next round, all these guys in round 9, Cam Scatabo, Isaiah Pacheco, why am I taking Pacheco or Scatabo in this range, given what we're projecting for the offense and their workload moving into this season? I'm not taking either one of those players. I also wouldn't be taking Brian Robinson, James Conner, or Travis Etienne really at all anywhere near where DeAndre Swift is. Certainly we see James Conner just seemingly doesn't want to die, but the players around there where it's Travis Etienne, James Conner, Brian Robinson, as far as production goes, I wouldn't bet on them ahead of Swift. And Swift has, I think, a lot more left in the tank than all these players. We'll see if Etienne can bounce back to form. I'm just skeptical of him in particular. So to me, a definite value. I think you can make the case for him like all the way up at running back 23, maybe even in the range of Joe Mixon, depending on what you think of him as far as his overall shelf life. Last year looked great, don't get me wrong, but he's getting really old as far as overall touches and his age. And basically the last point for DeAndre Swift, if you are someone that wants to go ahead and get one of those more of a hero RB strategy, right, where you're taking, a running back like a Genti, or let's say even a Barkley, an A-Chain, or even let's say Taylor or Breece Hall, someone in those top 4 rounds, and then that's really all you want to do early on. I think he's a perfect running back to be targeting somewhere in the late part of round 8 or early round 9. I think you're certainly going to have a very good chance to get him given this ADP. And I think it's a pretty safe option if you wanted to go more of a hero RB strategy and then lean into the running backs later on. I think Swift is a very perfect target at this range. All right, when we get into the third player on this list, I'm actually going to go back to the quarterback position. And he's coming off the board at the 708. This is going to be Justin Fields. Now, obviously straight up to Dak Prescott. I'm not telling you that I would take Justin Fields ahead of Dak Prescott in Dynasty. But I think the reality is Dak Prescott, the reason he's going that late is because he's getting older. And at that point, people don't feel like there's that much lifespan guaranteed with Dak Prescott, even though when we realistically take a look at the contract he just inked, that's not going to be the case. But the reality is everyone certainly after this, and in the range that Fields is going, Tua, right? You got Tua Tagovailoa, you got Sam Darnold, Anthony Richardson, Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford, all these type of quarterbacks. People don't feel like these are long-term bets, right? And we're talking about realistically short-term bets, or at least realistically there's scariness as far as how long they're going to be able to keep the job, or a guy like Matthew Stafford, how long can he stay healthy? How long is he going to continue to play? Point basically being with all that, if we're already looking in a smaller window, which for me and my dynasty teams, I'm always looking at either a 1 or 2 year window or 2 to 3 year window tops. Why would we not be betting on Justin Fields in a short window? Justin Fields should be going, I think, personally, a lot higher if you're willing to roster construct your team around knowing that it may not work out for Fields as far as his NFL stay with the Jets. But here's the thing. If I know that Fields has no one behind him, that's scary as far as the backups, basically betting against Fields when he is on the field and playing quarterback would be silly. Last year in those first 6 weeks of the season, where we can admit the offense was kind of gross overall, didn't have a lot of passing volume, and he didn't have many pass catchers there at all to speak of. During that 6-week stretch, he was quarterback 6, 19.1 fantasy points per game. And if you compared that 19.1 versus the entire season, not just the first 6 weeks, he still was quarterback 9 during that time. 19.1 would have been good for. So a top 10 quarterback, top 6, depending on the window you're looking at, realistically last year. Year prior, where he played the majority of the season, he was the starter for the Bears in that year. He did miss 4 games due to injury, but over that 12-game stretch, right, 18.4 fantasy points per game, which was quarterback 12 on the year. Go back to 2022, where he was the starter for the Bears. That time he missed 2 games, so he played 20.5 points per game, which was quarterback 6. So realistically, over the last 3 years, when he's on the field in a points per game situation, anywhere from quarterback 6 to quarterback 12. He's a back-end quarterback 1 if it doesn't go well. Basically, if he doesn't do well for the NFL side of things, and he's not a good thrower of the football, and the Jets suck, he probably still is going to be a low-end quarterback 1 in that situation. You're able to draft him at quarterback 23, where what if he actually has a little bit more success? Some of his metrics last year, as far as his overall clutch time throws, money throws, things of that nature, were up quite a bit in his time in Pittsburgh. If he's any bit better, he's going to have much more of a ceiling than so many of the players we're drafting outside of the top 15 in quarterback. And again, if you're at this spot and you're needing to have a quarterback 2 or a super flex option, I think he's one that I would be targeting, understanding that it's a short window, right? So using that pick and selection of Justin Fields, if he was to play more than a season or 2, that would be great. But if you just go ahead and draft him with the mindset of, okay, he is someone that I can put into my lineup, and while he's playing, I'm going to have a lot of success around him, but kind of thinking about your team in the future, knowing that you're not going to have the super flex position solved, I think that's perfectly fine. And I think the reality is most people think about the quarterback position in too long of a window anyway. So Justin Fields right now, easily for me on this list, someone that we should be targeting, or I think is a value at least in round 7. If you wanted to fade your second quarterback, or you're someone that just happens to wait on the quarterback position, I think Fields is someone that's going to be able to give you short-term production and potentially more than that if he actually does have the success and kind of develops into a better passer than we've seen in the prior years. All right, and the fourth player on this list, we're going to dive into the tight end position. And one of the things, if you've kind of listened to me in the past and prior, I'm someone that typically likes to wait on the tight end. And here is exactly why I like to do that, because the level of investment I think that you can make in players outside of the top 5 rounds versus someone like a Trey McBride or a Brock Bowers, it has nothing to do with the fact I'm not telling you that Brock Bowers is not him. He's not an elite level tight end. Or same thing with Trey McBride. Obviously his touchdowns should be going up. They almost have to inherently. It's not anything to do with that, but the level of investment where I'm talking about taking Brock Bowers in the first round near a Gibbs, a Bijan, a Malik Neighbors, a Justin Jefferson, that cost, the opportunity cost of that versus being able to address the tight end position a lot later. And I think there's a very realistic chance that they can at least hold serve, if not potentially even be higher than some of those players in production. Why would I not make the later pick? And this is where we're going to get into round 7, the 703 right now as far as picks go, coming off the board at tight end 7. This is going to be TJ Hockenson. And I get it, last year when he was on the field, it didn't look all that great. But remember, he's coming off a very late multi-ligament knee injury in 2023, very late in the season, basically in the playoffs. So if you look at last year, right, in 2024, he came back in week 9. He basically never got anywhere near, though, the snap share that he had been receiving basically all of his career, and certainly in his time in Minnesota prior to that. He was in the 50 to 60% range of snaps. When we take a look at when TJ Hockenson's on the field and healthy, which now being a full year removed, that's what we should be projecting. In 2023, he was 17.8 fantasy points per game in his 2023 season. That was actually tight end 1. There was not a single better tight end in that 2023 year than TJ Hockenson was. Going back to 2022, he got traded midway through the season. And if you take a look at his time from weeks 8 to week 17 when he was healthy and traded from Detroit to Minnesota, using that, we're talking about 16.93 fantasy points per game. Again, a top 3 option at the position. And then, okay, keeping that in mind, right? 17.8 in the season in 2023, and during his time in Minnesota in 2022, 16.93, right? Basically anywhere from 17 to 18 points a game, let's call it in that range. Last year, as far as points per game go, we had Trey McBride at 19.1, Brock Bowers at 18.7, George Kittle at 18.4, and then TJ Hockenson basically would slide in easily as the tight end 4, given what we've seen as far as his production when he was fully healthy and on the field. Now, remember 2023, TJ Hockenson, as far as points per game goes, was tight end 1. I think realistically, with TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison being potentially out of the lineup if there's a suspension to be had, he in this situation and new offense with J.J. McCarthy at the helm, I think realistically there's a case to be made where TJ Hockenson has just as good of a bet as almost anybody to be a top 5 tight end this year. And given that we have seen him be the tight end 1 overall finisher, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him be the tight end 1 this coming up season as far as production. TJ Hockenson also has shown the propensity to be someone that's well north of 100 targets. He's probably going to be someone that's in the range, if there was to be a tight end outside of Trey McBride and Brock Bowers, to be in that 130 to 150 range like those guys are. TJ Hockenson the year prior, 2023, he had 127 targets that year. I think as far as the overall volume, the fact that if J.J. McCarthy is any good, this offense again should be one of the best in the NFL and moving the ball a lot. We saw how Sam Darnold did last year. I think the bet on TJ Hockenson in round 7 is kind of a cheat code, because here's the other thing. He's not super old. TJ Hockenson's 27 years old. You look at just a round prior with George Kittle, okay, I get it. He's well over 30 years old. And while he is still a dog and a beast, is constantly finishing very well at the tight end position, certainly there's a lot more miles to be had there. Someone that's 27, I mean, realistically, a 27, 28-year-old tight end, that's looking like the prime of their career. TJ Hockenson at this point probably could end up having some of the best seasons he's ever had in the next few years. Now that he is fully healthy, he's an easy bet for me in round 7 if I wanted to kind of wait on the tight end position, but still have an outside chance to finish inside of the top 2-3 tight ends. TJ Hockenson, just too much of a value here at the 703. All right, so 5th and final player on this list, that's actually going to be Rome Odunze, and this is probably more of a controversial one. At the 504, wide receiver 19, and I think realistically, the draft the Chicago Bears had, the tight end coming off the board at 10, obviously Colson Loveland, and then Luther Burden in round 2, that's going to probably cloud, I think, what people think overall of the production we can project for Rome Odunze going into 2025 here with Ben Johnson. And I certainly can see on the surface and understand that being the case. But when I'm taking a look at Rome Odunze, the reason I think he's a value, even though he is, pretty expensive in round 5, once I get to round 5, range of outcomes obviously comes into play for every round and every player I'm drafting. But once you get to round 5 and beyond, it's really hard outside of probably rookies, I would say, to be shooting a shot on a player that has a ton of upside to capture. If all things go right for rookies, we know there's a lot of dynasty upside because people want to have both their cake and eat it too, right? They want to have a young player that has a ton of value that also can produce. And that's where you see guys like, Ladd McConkey going in round 3, right? You see guys like Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. Obviously, we know why those players that are coming off of great rookie seasons go high. So for guys like Tet McMillan, you definitely could see the scenario if they have a good season, him going a lot higher. But a lot of these rookies, right, Emeka Egbuka even, Luther Burden, kind of seemingly facing the same type of thing of Rome Odunze, where the target competition is kind of what keeping the price down for those players. Looking at Rome Odunze last year and looking at his situation going into this year, Rome Odunze was drafted at pick 9 overall. Huge level of investment. And when we look at last year overall for targets, Rome Odunze was 101 targets. They had a target hog in Keenan Allen, who also was over 100 targets. He had 122 targets. Then we take a look at DJ Moore having 140 targets. On the surface, none of these players actually did very well last year. You don't need me telling you how terrible the Chicago offense was as a whole. But on 101 targets, he had 734 yards relative to Keenan Allen's 744 yards. So Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, two very proven offensive weapons, both under 1,000 yards for the year. And they were, not even anywhere near as efficient. They're basically poor seasons for DJ Moore and for Keenan Allen in a vacuum. But not comparing the situation for Rome to those Chicago guys, I think it's a very clear and obvious case when I'm just taking a look at two different players that we can see that are inside of the kind of closer to elite territory in Dynasty. That's going to be Drake London, wide receiver 9, and that's going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver 12. But I think when we take a look at what they did in the rookie season and what Rome did in the rookie season, obviously you're going to start to see the case that I'm going to be making here. With Drake London in his rookie season, right? He came off that year with Atlanta, 117 targets, 72 catches, 866 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And for him, right, that was, I think, certainly nowhere near what everyone was hoping for as far as production goes. But the one thing that we do know with a guy like Drake London is he basically retained a ton of value. One thing to consider, right? That was better than what Rome Odunze did. But again, let's go to JSN now. So JSN, 93 targets, 63 receptions for that season, 628 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And at this time last year, JSN was in really murky waters because they did go ahead and bring back Tyler Lockett, and then DK Metcalf was there, right? So certainly on the surface, people didn't necessarily know if they were going to be able to project JSN to make the leap and become the wide receiver 1. He didn't do it right away, but we obviously saw how great he was in the second half of the season. He had a great year last year for Seattle. Now DK Metcalf out of town and Tyler Lockett out of town. I'm not necessarily making the case that everyone in Chicago is going to be out of town next year, but taking a look again at the first year for Rome Odunze, 101 targets, 54 catches, 734 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Are you seeing anything here between these 3 different seasons? A lot of similarities, right? And I think if you just put JSN's production and Drake London's production, at least from yardage standpoint, like Rome Odunze is dead smack in the middle. Here's the thing to consider, right? Drake London, because he was a player a lot of people believe in and a top 10 overall pick, his value stayed very high. But one of the reasons that was so important is that Drake London was always kind of viewed for Atlanta, at least, as the wide receiver 1. When we take a look at JSN's case, right, basically his value didn't come back until people started to see him be that wide receiver 1 overall. But when you look at the volume that he got overall and what he did in his rookie season as far as a floor goes, there's not a lot there that you should like. None of that you should like any better than what Rome Odunze did in his rookie year. Rome Odunze in his rookie year faced a lot of problems. Unrealized air yards, number 2 in the entire NFL, 917. 917 unrealized air yards is almost as many yards as anyone had. DJ Moore was the only person that had over 900 yards. There's a ton of meat left on the bone for Rome Odunze, and even if Luther Burden comes in and does very well in his rookie season, and you're looking at like Colson Loveland doing pretty well, there's no reason to tell me that you can't see a scenario where Rome Odunze still, given all that, isn't the wide receiver 1 as far as target goes in this offense. DJ Moore did earn 140, but what's really nice, I think, for Rome is a guy like DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is still going to earn a ton of respect from opposing defenses where he's basically that wide receiver 1 that's getting the top coverage from the majority of corners. A guy like Rome Odunze is probably going to be facing less coverage type of competition. Anyway, that's all I got. Let me know what you thought overall of this video down in the comments. If you thought there were some players I missed or that maybe I'm wrong on this list, let me know all that down in the comments. If you did find this useful and actionable, make sure you go down and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and also let me know what you'd like me to talk about as far as startups go in the future or overall just on the game of Dynasty. I'll see you back here, same time, same place next week. I'm out of here. Peace.